You might think a currency collapse is just about money becoming worthless, but it's about something far more intimate and terrifying. This isn't a story about economic charts you can ignore. Look, what if your life savings could evaporate before your next grocery run? That's the daily reality for millions in Iran right now. And honestly, their story is a mirror held up to the entire world. We often believe such disasters are always caused by war or obvious corruption. What if the causes were far more ordinary and insidious? It started with something many governments are tempted to do right now. Can you imagine your currency losing over 90% of its value in a decade? For Iran's rial, that's not an imagination. It's a recent history. The numbers are so large they become almost meaningless to outsiders. How did a nation with vast oil wealth end up here? The first crack appeared long before any international sanctions. It was a simple, seductive idea. Print money to pay the bills. Governments everywhere do this, but the scale matters. Think about it. What happens when you flood a market with currency no one actually earned? Prices don't just rise, they begin to sprint. Suddenly, a loaf of bread costs twice what it did last month. Your salary buys less every single time you receive it. People stop thinking in the long term because tomorrow is financially unknown. This creates a frantic, desperate energy on the streets. You start seeing it in the eyes of ordinary people just trying to survive. Now add a layer of geopolitical pressure from the outside. Sanctions did arrive, cutting off Iran from the global financial system. But here's the crucial thing most people miss. The sanctions didn't create the disease, they just attacked a weakened patient. They accelerated a collapse that was already in motion. So the rial didn't just fall, it went into a total free fall. And this is where the real warning begins for every other nation. What happens to a society when its basic unit of trust, money, vanishes? Look, commerce doesn't stop. It just gets twisted and brutal. A hidden, chaotic economy of gold coins and foreign cash erupts. The official exchange rate becomes a cruel joke told by the state. The real price of everything is negotiated in back alleys and on black markets. Your pension, your future, is now tied to the global price of an ounce of gold. Can you feel how destabilizing that is for a family? Normal life becomes a series of exhausting financial calculations. People spend hours just finding the best rate to change their meager cash. This isn't poverty in the traditional sense, it's a form of economic chaos. Productive work feels pointless when the reward dissolves in your hand. So why should someone in a stable country pay attention? Because the seeds are often sown during times of apparent stability. It starts with the government spending more than it can possibly collect. It's justified by crises, by subsidies, by the need to keep people content. The money printer hums to life quietly at first. Inflation is dismissed as temporary or even as a sign of growth. But once people lose faith, the process becomes a vicious cycle. Honestly, can any government truly restore that faith once it's gone? In Iran, people have voted with their wallets, abandoning the rial entirely. They cling to dollars, to euros, to any tangible asset they can find. This, in turn, makes the national currency even weaker, a self-fulfilling prophecy. The state's response is often a tightening of control, not a change of policy. They blame outsiders, they impose strict exchange rules, they arrest traitors, but you can't arrest a fundamental loss of confidence. The real tragedy isn't just the numbers on a screen, it's the quiet erosion of a normal life. Think about the shopkeeper who can't price his goods for next week. What's the point of ambition when the goalpost moves daily? You see a generation's dreams shrinking to fit inside a single urgent question: how do I get hard currency? Their entire economic mindset shifts from building wealth to simply preserving fragments of value. And that shift, honestly, might be the most contagious part of this entire crisis. Look at the professionals, doctors, engineers, teachers, watching their status evaporate. Why would a skilled person stay and work for a collapsing paper promise? They don't, and that brain drain then hollows out the country's future even more. So the crisis feeds on itself, consuming the very people needed for recovery. But here's the unsettling part for any nation watching. This didn't require a sudden revolution or a lost world war. It was a slow-motion disaster, approved one budget at a time. Can your country print its way out of a difficult political situation? Many in power certainly think so, and that's the seductive trap. Inflation is often sold as a sophisticated economic tool, yet on the street, it's just a brutal tax on everyone who holds the local money. The poor are hit first and hardest, but eventually it reaches everyone. Savings accounts become relics of a more stable, distant past. People begin to hoard physical goods instead of cash, distorting entire markets. Now, imagine the government's next move when its own money is rejected. They often try to create a digital version or a new, controlled exchange rate. But doesn't that just prove the original money is already broken? Trust is like a plate. Once it's shattered, you can't glue it back to its original strength. In Iran, the gap between the official story and street reality is now a canyon. And when that gap exists, public faith in every institution starts to crumble. Why believe official data on employment or health or anything else? This creates a kind of national schizophrenia that's incredibly hard to cure. So, is the warning just about avoiding hyperinflation? Look, it's deeper than that. It's about the social contract written in currency. Money is a promise from a society to its people that effort today will have value tomorrow. When that promise burns, what fills the void? Often it's anger, or apathy, or a frantic scramble for individual survival over the common good. You can see the social fabric thinning under this kind of relentless pressure. Neighbors become competitors for scarce dollars, not partners in a community. Honestly, how long can any civilization sustain that? Now, consider the global dimension that makes this relevant to you. We live in a world of interconnected currencies and digital capital flight. A loss of confidence can spread almost at the speed of the internet. Investors don't need to physically leave. They can withdraw billions with a keystroke. Could a similar collapse be contained to one country today, or would it ripple outward? The mechanisms might be different, but the human instincts are wan quen shang tong. People will always flee to safety, whether it's gold, crypto, or a stronger foreign note. The true shield for any nation isn't just wealth, it's credibility. And that credibility is built over decades, but can be spent in a few short years. Once it's gone, the road back is agonizingly long and steep. So what's the alternative when a government faces real financial pressure? The answer is politically difficult, economically painful, and absolutely necessary. It requires discipline that most democratic systems struggle to maintain. That discipline means making choices that are immediately unpopular for long-term survival. It means telling people they can't have everything funded by magical money creation. And let's be honest, what political leader willingly delivers that bitter medicine? They often choose the easier path, hoping the consequences will land on someone else's watch. But in Iran's case, the consequences arrived, and they're sitting in everyone's kitchen. So is this an inevitable fate for any nation that overspends? Not necessarily, but it is a clear destination if you stay on that path long enough. The scary part is, you don't see the cliff until you're already flying over the edge. Economic gravity always wins, no matter how clever the story is told by officials. Look at the ordinary Iranians, who have become experts in navigating the chaos. They've developed a sixth sense for the market's whispers and rumors. Their financial wisdom is now about survival, not growth. A tragic shift in thinking. Can you feel the collective exhaustion that must create? Now, zoom out and see the warning etched into this entire experience. A currency isn't just paper. It's a thermometer for a nation's institutional health. When the currency fails, it's because trust in those institutions has already failed. The collapse is just the final visible symptom of a much older sickness. That sickness can grow in plain sight, dismissed as manageable or normal. We often hear about strong economies and weak ones, but strength isn't about resources. It's about the rules a society imposes on itself. It's about saying no when every political impulse is screaming to say yes. So, what's the takeaway for a viewer living in a stable country today? Pay attention to the quiet decisions, not just the loud crises. Watch for the subtle growth of debt that everyone says is no problem. Notice when saving money in a bank starts to feel like a losing bet. Honestly, when people begin to distrust their own currency's future, the clock is ticking. The Iranian rial story is a masterclass in how that clock runs down. It shows that the value of money is a shared hallucination, but one we all need to believe in. Once enough people stop believing, the dream is over. The aftermath isn't just an economic reset. It's a rewiring of human relationships and aspirations. So the next time you hear a government promise easy solutions funded by the printing press, remember the streets of Tehran. Remember the shopkeeper with his calculator, the doctor looking for an exit, the family hiding dollars in their home. The reality is the starkest possible reminder that financial laws are as real as physical ones. You can ignore them, but you can't escape the consequences. In the end, every nation holds its currency's value in its own hands through its own choices. The warning from Iran is not about geography or politics. It's about human nature and the temptation of the easy way out. And that temptation is a universal story, one that could be written anywhere next.